Let us hear the word of God as it comes to us from the second chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Well, it is a familiar story, this story of the three wise men who have come to visit the Christ child. At least, we've always thought there were three. Did you notice that the Bible never tells us that there were really three? I suppose we have just come to assume that or picture that because there were three gifts brought that day: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Did you ever wonder why those three gifts? Maybe, I don't know, studying some time back, maybe that was an epiphany for me. It was a revelation to think about that a little bit, because those gifts were very intentional. Gold was the gift for a king. Frankincense, incense, was the gift for a god. And myrrh was the burial spice that would be used on the body of one who would lay down his life. These were not just about gifts for a baby shower. They were very intentional. They are very deep and rich in their meaning because they serve to speak to us about the identity of this child, one who was understood to be a king, a god, and one who would lay down his life for us. That is so deep and meaningful. I don't mean the next thing I say to be too silly, but I couldn't resist. You know, someone said one time if it had been three wise women, they would have asked directions, arrived on time, cleaned the stable, and brought gifts of diapers in a casserole. Yeah, Delana. Exactly, you got that. Yeah, I couldn't resist. But somehow I think some of the deep meaning of these three gifts would have been lost. The Magi brought those gifts to Jesus that day. What gifts do we bring to Jesus? What gift do you offer the King, the God, and the one who laid down his life for you? What do our gifts of time, of talent, of treasure, of sacrifice, what do our gifts say about who Jesus is for us? What do our gifts, what we offer to God, say about the priority that God has in every facet of our lives? For us, is He just one God among many? Is He just one priority among many? I think about that often. What are the things in my life that I spend more money on, I spend more time to? Well, you get where I'm going with that. Where is God in the priority list of our lives? In the fall, during our Wednesday night Making the Connection program that we have seasonally, and it's going to be starting up again January the 15th, and there's information in your worship bulletin, but it was really kind of neat. I facilitated a small group discussion of the book called Geography of God, A Geography of God, by the Reverend Michael Linval, and it was really kind of neat. Michael Linval, many years ago, he served as an intern at First Presbyterian Church here in Fort Wayne, where I grew up. And since then, Reverend Linval has in fact retired here in Fort Wayne, and we were honored to have him come one of the evenings with book in hand and actually get to hear from the author as he shared with us. So I do want to share with you, I want to share that much of the remarks I have this morning really come from him. The book is really great, and I'm not sure, Cheryl, do we have this in the library? Not yet, but we will, right? Okay. A Geography of God. But in it, which is really where the title of this sermon comes from, All or Nothing, Reverend Linval talked about a friend of his by the name of Tom. And Tom was an engineer. He had that kind of organizational thinking. And they would ride motorcycles together and get together. And one day when they were together, they got into this discussion, and Tom was sharing with Reverend Linval, Michael. He shared with him how he had been reflecting on his own life. And he had this awareness that in life we tend to have what he called bands of interest. He even got out some graph paper and started charting his life and thinking about what are the bands of interest that we have in our lives over the years. One band of interest may be career or our job. Another band of interest may be our family time spent together. Perhaps throughout life we have little bands of interest that are leisure activities or hobbies or things that we enjoy. And so he began to think about his life in terms of these different bands of interest, reflecting on how they may change over time. Maybe early in our lives we're spending more time on education, other times career, other times family. It changes how we spend those. And Tom made the comment that he thought that for some people, our religious faith is probably a band of interest in our lives. And as Reverend Linval reflected on this is what he shared. So with your permission, I want to just read it. The whole book is great. He's a great, very, very articulate. He says, my friend Tom was a committed Christian, and he was a savvy enough Christian to understand that identifying religion as just one of a number of bands of interest on your life's chart just wouldn't have cut it with Jesus. If there is one bottom line truth that Jesus is insistent about, it is that if you should choose to follow him, you have to follow him with all of you, not just a part of you. Everything we are is to be turned around toward God at the center. If faith means anything, It is nothing less than a 180-degree reorientation of the whole self toward God. That ancient pagan tribe of lusty warriors named the Franks were among the first of the Germans to be converted to Christianity. Like many of the tribes during this era, the Franks were converted to Jesus en masse. And the group underwent baptism by wading into a river to be baptized by the thousands. They understood what this meant at some level, namely that this would make them followers of a new king, Jesus. They perhaps understood that this Jesus was called a Prince of Peace, doubtless an odd title to their ears. The story is told that when these Frankish warriors came to be baptized in the water of the Rhine or the Rhone, they were always careful to hold their swords above their heads out of the waters of baptism, not to save them from rust, but to keep them from Jesus. It wouldn't do then. It won't do now. This Jesus asks for everything. You can't hold your sword out of the water. You can't hold your career out of the water. You can't hold your idle pastimes out of the water. You can't hold your checkbook out of the water. You can't even hold your love life out of the water. Everything has to go under so that it can rise again. Nothing can be held back. Faith in God cannot be just another band of interest on this journey across life's graph paper. Any God worth the name can never be confined to a light blue strip called religion, however broad it might be. Pretty good, huh? And yet, if we are worth our salt, I would suggest pretty frightening, pretty challenging, pretty daunting. At the end of the day, it's all or nothing with Jesus. Our faith is not just one small band of interest that sits among others. It, in fact, is the network of mesh. That's kind of the only phrase I could think of. It is this network of mesh that covers all of the bands of interest. Faith is not just one band of interest. It is to be the center of everything. And when God is the center of everything in our lives, then we are called to offer everything to Him. Our careers are not a band of interest separate from God. We are to offer our careers to God. Our families are not one band of interest separate from God. We are to offer our families to God. Our leisure time, our relationships, all of our life are not separate bands of interest, but they are, in fact, all of the things that we offer to God. Everything has to go under the water so it can rise again. Born anew, with God at the center, nothing can be held back. The wise men came that day, bringing gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, precious to be sure. What gift do you bring? What will you offer to the Christ child? Just a part? Just a little? Are you holding your sword out of the water? Or will you offer Him everything?